Tesla stock has been on a wild ride, with the stock jumping the last month and now crashing. The one thing we can predict is more wild swings and fluctuations to come. But what will it make the stock get back on the rise, and what will make it finally get over $400 forever? Is this even possible? New, more affordable vehicles, FSD licensing, Cybertruck progress, and of course, Robotaxi. Will these have an impact, or are we in for yet another year of flat growth? We have Sat joining us today. Sat is an early Tesla investor since 2012. He's attended every single shareholder meeting since then, and he has seen everything that's happened to the stock, ups and downs like crazy. Welcome, Sat. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Herbert, for having me.
One of the things why I'd like to bring you on board here is because you have been a Tesla stock owner since the very beginning, since the IPO, and you've been, or shortly afterwards, and you've been following it. You've seen the volatility. So, this is a chart of what happened in 2024 for Tesla stock. And of course, it's been like 2.5, almost 3 years of flat growth, completely dead stock. And then it finally popped up in the last 3 months. Of course, everybody believes it was the election results that made that pop up. And now, of course, we're falling back down again. Significant drop. Tell me what you're thinking about the volatility of this stock.
Yeah, I mean, it's always been very volatile. I think it's less volatile now, just getting a more of what it used to be in the last few months. And since it's pretty flat for the most part, people have gotten kind of used to it, not really moving very much, and then all of a sudden it skyrockets, and then also goes down just as fast. And it's part of the Tesla company's stock movement. And it's pretty normal. I don't think it's as bad as before. Even now, I don't think it's as bad as before. But you'd have to go back to when it was really volatile in like 2013, 14, and it tripled, and then it goes back down, and another year goes back up. But it does so within days or weeks. It wasn't over a span of months. So it was very volatile. Now we just see revisiting of that with a lot of activity happening on the political side, the vehicle gross margins and so forth. So earnings has an effect all the time, but there's other elements to why the Tesla stock is always volatile, and Elon's always out there. I haven't seen him change. People have been pretty critical about him off and on, but that's been him, and I don't expect anything different from him.
So, I mean, it's been him forever since we've held the stock. I want to show some beautiful slides Søren Basher had created, and it talks about what has happened to the stock. So, of course, if we look at since 2019, here's what happened to Tesla stock. And since, what is it here? Looks like it's around October of 21, somewhere around that point. It's been dead money for 779 trading days. It's just been going down like crazy. That's a beautiful way. This is the slide I wanted to show you. I'm sure you've seen it. I'm sure you've experienced it. This is Tesla stock. And each one of these lines is the drawdown, how much it fell from its all-time high. And every time it pops back up to the line up here, that's it hit the all-time high again. And you can see that there's just been regular massive drawdowns. Significant. Of course, we all experienced it when it went almost 75% down to $100. The thing about this stock is that this is crazy to experience this, but every stock, even Apple, Google, Microsoft, they all have similar experience. What's your explanation or feeling about investing in a kind of company like Tesla?
Yeah, it's not for the faint of heart. People want to get out of it when it goes down, and then they just want to catch the upswing, and it doesn't work that way because you can't ever time it exactly when. The last time it was skyrocketing in like 2020, the other part besides the inclusion of S&P 500 for obvious reasons, more funds could buy in, but the other part that triggered it to even jump higher was like the deal with Hertz, and that didn't equal to actual, like, the number was relatively big, but it's not big enough for it to warrant that kind of movement. But it's also the sentiment of where and the confidence of the business. So there's a lot of elements that goes into it, and then whenever you hit the all-time highs, some people are going to take the profits off, and you can't keep up with that kind of pace every single year. Every like Nvidia is pretty flat for months now, for like 6 months. So they hit all-time highs. They go through the same thing. So it's not unlike other tech companies. It does go through the same similar situations. It's just Tesla has a bigger microscope on it, and they're tackling bigger issues in multiple places. So it's a lot harder to um, assess it in the same way as the other ones, where there's so many other moving parts, and yet it's still fundamentally looked at as a car company in terms of the earnings in the short term. So when the production and deliveries and other stuff that come in, that's a regular earnings related stuff, that's not Wall Street's expectation, then it obviously moves down. And it's always been that way, where the earnings comes out, it's not perfect for the short term, and then it'll move back down. And if it does hit those numbers and didn't expect it, then it moves back up. So it just the way I see it is you have more down years than the up,
Yeah.
but the upswing is far greater
Yeah.
than the down. So, it's kind of like
That's exactly.
going up mountains, and then it goes back down and goes back up another mountain that's higher. So eventually it's going to go up, and where the 400 is going to be something of the past. And right now it's hard to see because it's after split, but pre-split, when I first bought the stock was $26. Now it's
Yeah.
a dollar 73 because it's split so many times. So when you put that into perspective, it's like, well, the numbers have gotten way smaller. If I had kept it that way, we're still like $1,000 or whatever it is. It's like an astronomical number that it would have been if you just kept it the same. It was no split. But because
Yeah.
we've done splits, it's harder to see. So that's the other part too. It's like in reality, we're way above the threshold of what we were in the past, and it seemed like forever that it's gonna, even the executive compensation that Elon had to hit, it seemed like a dream that he would hit 50 billion, 100 billion, and now
Yeah.
it's like a
I
completely
remember it.
different. Yeah, it's like now it's a trillion, 2 trillion. It's a whole different ballpark, but it seemed like an uphill battle. But once it goes back up and down, eventually the bottom is not going to be as low as the highs of the previous. And so I think that the longer the period that we have down periods, that was 779 days. The previous
Hmm.
one was 6 years. So it's longer. You could have got the stock at 2013, middle of the year, for the same price at the middle of 2019. So you could have said, you could have gone into other stuff, but how would you know that exploded 10x in 2020? Like, you wouldn't have it. And so you would have missed it because you would have been like, oh, I'm comfortable with other companies, other stocks, and you wouldn't have been able to jump on that. So it's a huge difference. And it isn't like there wasn't any incremental increases during that 6 years. There was. So you can't ever get that same kind of return if you just decide to jump in and out. I don't know how you can time that perfectly. If you have that magic ball, great for you. I don't know. I don't know how to do that. I just keep
Yeah.
buying it, and if I have extra cash at the low points, I go in more. And so if that negative 65% happens again, then I'll just buy more. It's because you're not going to have
Yeah.
that happen. Like, you're not going to be able to buy it at that price eventually. I don't think you're going to be able to buy it at $100 anymore in the future. I don't think
Well,
it's going to
so that's
happen.
what I want to ask you, right? When does it, you know, hit a certain mark and it won't be able to come back below that mark anymore because the company has fundamentally changed and has reached a level. So we've seen it, gone from $400 down to 100. Now we saw it go up to 480, and then it fell down to 300s at this point, or below 400. When do you think that we're going to finally hit a mark and it'll just never get past that again? Like, let's say the $400 mark.
Yeah, and I think it's gonna get there relatively soon. Within a couple of years, I think it will. We'll have that as part of the past, most likely,
Hmm.
because there's a lot of moving parts. It's not going to change. The car industry is very capital intensive. It moves much slower. Every 4 or 5 years, more of a change of the car versus every year for a phone. But you have several things is that the other OEMs are not able to produce EVs in volume and make a profit,
Right.
so they're scaling back. So uh, someone needs to fill that shoes, and Tesla is the best to do it. They're gonna have the compact car coming out at some point, and the compact car is where it's gonna be much bigger than the Model 3 and Model Y. And maybe people in the US may not see it that way because it's not for the US market. It's for Asia and Europe. And if you go to places where they need the vehicles in Europe and Asia, you'll know that the compact car is the perfect size vehicle. In Japan, you can't fit the Model Y into most of the parking lots because it's like an elevator parking lot. You can't even fit in it, or even the one that's like stationary. It has to be the flat ground one, not the one that goes into the elevator. and so it's very inconvenient. It's still a large vehicle. People think the Model 3 is a small vehicle. It's actually a large vehicle in Japan, and even in like countrysides of Italy. Like I went to Italy, my friend has a compact car. They're not going to get a regular standard size sedan. It's too big for the roads. It's not necessary, and so when you see that where the market's going to go and Tesla is getting ready for it, they're going to have it unveiled sometime this year. So when that goes into production, and usually it takes about 18 months to 24 months for the actual volume production to take effect on the short-term earnings, where the Wall Street is going to be like, okay, this is actual materially impactful. So when you look at it from the potential of it, and then you see the earnings where it's going to hit the short-term part of it, it's going to be a little bit before it goes up. And the year that they usually do the volume production is usually harder for it to go to all-time highs. It's unlikely from what I've seen. It's usually the year after or 18 months after that really hits it. And so even the 3 and Y, that was the case. And so I think they're better at doing it, if it's especially if it's the same platform. And also they're simplifying the platform. So even though it's new platforms, are simplifying it. So I think the compact car, when it hits volume production, is going to be a whole different level that they're going to reach. And even like the Model Y is 2 to 3 times more than Corolla, and it's outselling it by the same quantity in terms of quantity. And so if you're going to have an even cheaper vehicle than the 3 and the Y, and it's going to be pretty much cheaper than the gas cars of its class, because the uh, electricity is cheaper to fuel it. So it's going to be cheaper than the gas car comparison. It's going to be no brainer to get it. And so
Very interesting. So you actually are you saying then that you think that you call it compact car, but these are the more affordable vehicles, but they're going to be a smaller form factor. At least one of them will be. You think it's going to be a pretty big deal, although you're saying that maybe the next year when they actually are fully in scale.
yeah,
But you think it's going to be a big deal, but that didn't really give me the answer. That is that the thing that's going to then turn it that the stock will never go below 400?
I think
It's not. It's,
I think it's the FSD licensing, and then
yeah.
with the compact car, and the Robotaxi, whenever that's going to be. But I mean,
So those three have to happen, and then at that point, you're comfortable to say that the stock will never fall below 400 again.
it will be unlikely. I mean, it can intraday, but in terms of like yearly, when you look at it on the yearly kind of basis, I don't think it'll go down beyond that point. And once you have all those three, and then you'll have other models being unveiled, or at least be announced. Elon did say that eventually they're going to be in every segment sometime in the future, and so they can only go at a certain pace. But I think the compact car and FSD is gonna be a big seller. I know it's double digits in the U.S. They just did it for Switzerland and then for China to have permission to use the FSD. So the regulators are coming around, I think. And then the thing is that you can add it on later. That's the beauty of it. So if people the compact car and the other vehicles that's out there right now, they don't need to do anything to get FSD.
Here's what I think we just it was a complete thought anyways. Let's move on to the next topic. We'll bring you to Cybertruck. But that was a good answer. Okay, so I'll take it on from here. Okay, thank you so much, Sad. I appreciate that. I like that you actually listed out, right, the three things that need to be there before we get to. They will never get past 400 again, and yeah, it's a combination of the auto growth, new segments, but yeah, you do need FSD, you do need Robotaxi to make that leap and change. So let's get back to what happened now. In just we just got the earnings report, or sorry, the production delivery numbers were dropped. You wanted to mention a little bit of why you thought there was a miss. Let's share this number. So you had Q4 numbers, Model 3, or the total was 459 production, but 495 deliveries. It's under the 500,000 mark, but they did split it out between the Model 3Y and other models. So what was your thinking about this?
Well, I mean, we don't know exactly how many of those are the Cybertruck, but I know, there has to be pretty significant number to ramping up. And the thing is, uh, I think it's not as, I don't know, people are interpreting it pretty negatively, but and especially the short term people, but I think the production for the Cybertruck is a positive thing, and because they don't break it out, you don't know exactly how many units, but each of the foundation series are basically 4 times more, 3.5 to 4 times more than a Model 3. And so it's the first time in a while where they're actually producing another vehicle that is a platform that is much more expensive than the 3 and the Y. They're going downstream in terms of the market since the X. And so when you introduce the 3, which is 30 to 40K, 45K, and then the Model Y is $5,000 more. You're still doing, the lower part of the market. You introduce
Right.
Cybertruck. It's right now it's founded. We just exited the Foundation series. They're starting to do the regular ones, and so it's 4 times more the price of the Model 3. So you can't just look at it in terms of, oh, here's the numbers of deliveries and quantity. Well, it's priced way more. So it's, in my eyes, it's the equivalent of 4 times of whatever they're producing.
Mm.
And now we're going off of the foundation service and they're starting to do a cheaper one. The cheaper one now is like 70 something $1,000. It qualifies for the 7,500 credits while it lasts. So it's starting to move down the stream in terms of the pricing, and they're getting efficient at the cost. Elon had already mentioned in Q3 earnings that they're already gross margin positive, and that's less than a year. That's like 10 months. Whereas you see the other competitors, 3 4 years past, they're still negative 30% or 100%. I don't know what the number is. It's so negative that it's insane that they can even keep production for 3 4 years that way. Tesla's pretty much most of the time, unless there's some major issue, been gross margin positive by a big number by 18 months in. And it's not a surprise 10 months in, Cybertruck is already gross margin positive. So going forward, I don't see how the gross margins are going to improve. And they're going to probably reach um, in double digits at some point. So the more that they produce and the cheaper it gets, it's gonna add, really show up on the earnings basically. So I think it's different because this time it's a truck and it's a higher priced vehicle than the 3 and the Y, which is the reason why I think the compact car is going to be cheaper and higher in volume. If you want to go back to the production deliveries, well, when the compact car goes into volume production, you'll have a higher production deliveries every earnings when that's on volume production. So when I talk about units, the compact car is going to hit the units, but you're going to have to sell way more of the compact car to equal one Cybertruck. And
Yeah.
so I think the utility is different, the segment's different, and the vehicle type is different too. So, and I don't see any of the competitors doing well in that segment, in that even that price range. I don't see it doing well. And the thing that people forget is that Model 3, Model S and the X at
Yeah.
80 to 100K was selling at 200,000 units because that was the only option. Now you have like a slew of options. I see most of the other, like many of the other EVs as compliance cars at this point to deal with the carbon tax, because they're actually not serious about it. They're rescinding their divesting out of their production lines, shutting it down, or limiting to like 30K a year, and everything they said about it before, they've scratched those plans. And they're never called being lying, but they're basically lying through the PR departments. I followed it for at least 8 years now that they keep on saying stuff and never happens. And then meanwhile, Cybertruck is trotting along, gross margin positive. So I think it's always the news is very harsh on Tesla, even though I think they're doing a great job with the progress. And because they didn't hit it out of ballpark immediately, and or the end of the year, then they get docked for it. But the other car company is going to be like, "Oh, we missed
Oh,
it by
for
five
sure.
years, but it's okay."
Yeah.
It's like 5 years ago we should have done it, and they promised something and they finally do it. It's 5 years later. Oh, it's not a problem. And so I think it's always that part of the psychological bias that's also there, and the way that's reported. And so that's why I think the volatility is even more for that reason too, because like the news also sways people around. I went inside a truck to a drive-through, and the lady's like, "Oh, I heard they're breaking down." And I'm like, "Well, who did you listen?" And it's like, "Oh, from the news." It's like, "Well, go figure," because Tesla doesn't advertise. And she's like, "Oh, okay, now it makes sense." The lady was pretty
Hmm.
smart, and so when you listen to the wrong segments, like you're not gonna see it that way. So people are gonna jump ship the second everything's going because they think that's true, and it's really not. And I see it as they're doing a great job with it. The ramp up to a gross margin positive. That's the most important part in my eyes. I don't care how many units they're selling at this point because they're
Yeah.
getting into volume production. My point is that it has to be positive gross margin. That's the most important part. So the more units they're going to sell, it's going to add to the bottom line of the balance sheet. It's not happening for the other OEMs because they're negative. So, and they're going to go to the next model. And so that's why I think you see the progress of the Cybertruck doing really well. And yeah, they missed whatever CAGR that 50% they're saying, but I think when the compact car comes in volume production, that will
We're back.
probably be back where it is because it's an average now. And you have to see it chronologically. It's going to take longer time because you have a lead time of the compact car and volume production. So I think they'll eventually get back to it. But when it gets to bigger numbers, also it's statistical part. Bigger numbers is hard to get 50%. It's easy to go from 2,000 to 5,000 and then 10,000 to 20,000. That's if you didn't include in the beginning years, you're going like 100%. So as long as they're going to grow and they have gross positive margins, and I think it's going to be great. At a certain point, they're going to have to be electric vehicles for every segment, and someone has to make it. Uh, right now, I don't see other car companies coming in. Maybe some of the Chinese automakers, but the one in the U.S., I don't see it happening. So Tesla has to take over at some point. It's going to be another long leeway. Uh, but I think where the government is more friendly, Elon's working with Trump, helps understand the technology. And the thing is, like, this is the other thing too. Uh, like I've heard stories of other executives of other tech companies or biomedical, whatever else that it may be, that new frontier technology that politicians don't know. They meet up with the politician if it's regulation related, because the politicians don't know. You've seen it when about the internet. They're so far behind on understanding the internet because they didn't grow up with it. So you have to have a government that's willing to listen to some of the stuff and collaborate with them on the regulation part. And I think FSD's my biggest hurdle with the FSD and Robotaxi was the regulation. It wasn't the technology. B13 is phenomenal. It's just so little glitches in here and there, but it's phenomenal compared to before. I've seen it as really great since V11 because I'm in LA. So uh, but without the regulation being there and controlling that collaborative process and being positive about it, it's a lot harder. So, and you have more countries that's being open to it, and it takes $0 to send it over, and the customer could decide to choose to buy it 3 years later, 5 years later, 2 years later, and whenever they feel like it. And if subscription, they could turn it off whenever they don't want it. But I suspect once you use it, then you don't want to not use it anymore. So I think as long as the regulation comes along, the FSD does
Yeah.
incremental improvements, and they get to the place where most people are secure with using it and see the value in it. That tipping point is going to be at some point in your future, and it costs none to ship it out. It's already you just the customer just has to pay for it and then downloads to your vehicle. So I don't see the hurdles as big as long as they're going to collaborate process with the government and then get the regulations straightened out. And that's when I think it'll really take off. And then the other OEMs are probably going to have to license it. They're not going to be anywhere close to it. And I don't think they're going to try. Uh, they're not doing software. They're making still hardware. And it's not a hardware anymore, it's more software now. And that's what the problem is. We have so many of the other OEMs so focused on the mechanical part and the hardware. um, I've heard stories where they have to take their cars into a dealer to do updates.
Hmm.
So that's insane. It takes 25 minutes for us to download and install the software in our own garage. So I don't see how you can beat that service. So when you look at it that way, I think the Cybertruck has been doing really great. Um, I've used the FSD on it. I think it's great. It drives really great. I'd say the easiest vehicle that I've ever driven. And the steer by wire and the 48-volt architecture, it's going to go into the other vehicles. Eventually, it's going to be updated. New vehicles, compact car ones. So I see it as part of the intra, like it's kind of like the intraday trading, like in between of that year. This whole year, I think it's going to be like the in between section of the all-time highs going back down and then going to the next all-time high. It's going to take a little bit, but in terms of
Hmm.
progress, during the down years, we quadrupled the amount of vehicle production, and the stock was still going down. So when people cite the earnings, it also does the opposite. When the earnings going up in terms of units, the financials could they see the financials as being negative, and the stock goes down, even though the financials and revenues are going up. So you're not going to always have the correlation with just the earnings and the other way around. So
I think you did a good job of explaining that earlier, right? Which is the Cybertruck is much more expensive than the other vehicles. And so even though the units are lower, margins could actually, may show up. There might be some surprise there in the margins in the first quarter. Is that what you're thinking, or do you
oh
have
yeah.
any estimate of that at this point?
Yeah, well, I mean, look at the F-150. They've historically they make their bread. Ford makes their bread and butter with the F-150. Like the amount of
Mhm.
units they sell, 200. I think it was like 200,000 per month or something. It's insane numbers. But they also have different tiers that's way more expensive. And I think that Cybertruck isn't even the most expensive of the truck set that's out there. This truck's like way more expensive. If you put the options. I think the Raptor was like way more expensive than the the Cybertruck ones. So it's not like the segment doesn't have vehicles that expensive. I'm just saying that when it's the first one that's going to be profitable and you're volume production, it's going to take a while. So, and you have other people already set in their ways the vehicle they like. It's going to take a while for Tesla to be recognized as producing a really great truck. So, and it's in that, and it's happening. It's already happened with the luxury segment of the sedans with the Model S and X, and then the Model 3 and Y. It's happened. So it's just a matter of time. You give it a year, every year, look at the results of the market share.
Yeah.
BMW, Mercedes has gone down, and and Tesla also, this other thing, Tesla has not been the very first to do it. There's always some other OEM that comes out before them, and they don't take advantage of the first advantage move as much as they should have. And when Tesla comes around, they make a really good product and they hit positive gross margin, and they cannot beat them on cost. And that's why I'm saying Elon knows how to. He's the most capital efficient CEO in terms of the auto industry. And so you're not going to beat their production line in terms of the efficiency and the financials once they're involved in production. And even getting to it is really fast. So I don't know how
Mhm.
you're going to compete with that eventually. So that's why I'm saying within another year, let's revisit the Cybertruck and where the gross margin is going to be at. And are you going to be buying a truck you know that's going to where the company's going to be there, or are you going to buy a truck from a company that may not support it after they may discontinue it, or the company itself might not be there anymore?
Mhm.
And so, uh, I mean, I like the products of the other OEMs, but I would be hesitant. I think most people would be hesitant if, even though if you have a great warranty, if the company's not going to be there, are you really going to have confidence in buying that product? And and they've had a long time, 3 4 years. Most of the at least the electric trucks that's out there have been out there for a while, way before the Cybertruck, and they have not come close to even break even. So
Yeah.
uh, I think it's gonna matter of time before it shows up again. I think this year is gonna be not as exciting in terms of the Tesla stock. I kind of, I'm always bullish, so I have to kind of be biased to taper down my enthusiasm. But on a capital intensive year where they're gonna do volume production, ramp up for compact
Yeah. That's
car, I think it's going to
yeah.
take a little bit.
That's a very good point. It's a capital intensive year. They're launching several new vehicles, but as you've already mentioned, these are going to be you feel pretty confident that they're compact and that we'll have a new segment despite it not being I think $30,000, right? That's kind of like the number that Elon has posted out there. Then of course you think that FSD licensing needs to happen, Robotaxi. These are the things that will can get it past the $400 mark forever, but in the meantime, it's going to be very volatile. That's what we've been seeing. So, Sat, do you you are a long term investor? You've been buy and hold. You just mentioned you keep buying whenever you have the stomach for it to fall. But do you also play around the edges? Do you play options as well?
Yeah, I do. And
Yeah.
I've been doing it for a few years now, but I want to do less of it. I'd rather look at different companies and study more of Tesla and more like Nvidia and other companies that are part of the. I see it as part of the Tesla ecosystem. They're all kind of in the
Yeah.
same industry. They're all supporting each other. They kind of have to support each other. And so, but I do options, and I think I'll continue doing some of it. But it's volatile. It's definitely hard. The options going up
Yeah.
and down. So it's a
Yeah.
different set of skill sets, and I would prefer to do it. But more conservatively. So um, yeah, right now it's like selling calls, right? Because it's going down. So
Yeah, so you're playing with it, just trying to learn. But yeah, that's what we said at the earlier with CERN's stock charts. Tesla is very volatile, as are many companies. And so if you can figure out if you want to play that, you can. It's a gambling, but you can go and do that. But in the meantime, just hang in there because eventually it will hit that next milestone. And that's what we were talking about, right? The
yeah,
company is very volatile, but eventually we'll do that. Okay, well, thank you so much, Sat. That was great. You are somebody that people need to listen to because you've been following the stock since its beginning. You've experienced it all, and you kind of always bring back what has happened in the past. Like the future always seems to echo a little bit, and you kind of recognize what's happening. And here we are again, right? It shot up quickly. It just took a couple weeks, like several weeks, a month. It shot up significantly. Of course, it's going to fall, and of course, it's going to go up again, and it's going to keep falling until certain things happen that it forever changes the company again. And we're getting there
well, I've heard
slowly. Right?
people who kind of go by the news, and so
Yeah.
they're like Tesla was down, they get out of it, and then when it goes up, they're like, oh, it's might be this one-time thing, and then when it shoots up like all-time highs, then they're like, oh, I want to go in. So they do the exact opposite of what you should do. They sell
Opposite.
at the low, and then they buy at the high,
Yeah.
as opposed to just hold on to it. If you just hold on to it, they would have made a great profit, but they people don't want to deal with the downside. So I think if you're gonna buy, you should be buying it as if you're buying a house. You're not gonna sell it the next day or next year. So when if it does go back down to -60%, I'll buy some probably because yeah, I don't. I mean, every time it's like you're not gonna be able to go back to it. And I look at it historically,
There you go.
you're
And
not gonna be able to go back.
that's
So
the point. Yeah. That's the point. I mean, somebody like you and me who've held Tesla for so long at this point, and somebody goes, "Oh, you know, it eventually the stock is like you were saying earlier. The stock is if you remove the splits, you multiply 400 or 300 times 15.
yeah,
So we're talking about $7,000 stock right now, actually, right,
yeah.
to what it was before. So thank you so much, Sat. Appreciate that. Follow him on his X account at SA_futurist. SA futurist. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. I've created a website that is the most comprehensive resource for the Tesla investor. Please check it out. Simply go to my website at herbertong.com.